Ethan Cole never imagined that the worst day of his life would begin with such a small promise. That morning, standing in the narrow kitchen of his two-bedroom apartment on the west side of Chicago, he placed a slightly burned piece of toast in front of his daughter and told her that no matter what happened, he would be home on time that night. It was Sophie's 10th birthday, and she had been waiting for it for weeks. Not because she expected a big party or expensive gifts or a room full of people singing her name. Ethan could not afford any of that. All Sophie wanted was chocolate cake, pizza from the little place at the end of their street, and one quiet evening on the rooftop with her father, looking up at the stars. 3 months earlier, she had seen an old telescope in the window of a second-hand shop. She had not asked for it. She had only stood there, staring through the glass for longer than usual. Ethan remembered. For 3 months, he had taken extra night shifts, repaired a neighbor's fence on a Sunday, and fixed the lights in a small grocery store after work. Every $20 bill he saved went into an envelope hidden inside his drawer. 2 days before Sophie's birthday, he finally bought the telescope. It was now wrapped in an old gray blanket in the trunk of his worn-out Ford, waiting for the moment when Sophie would open it and realize that her father had remembered everything. Ethan had imagined that moment many times, but he never got to see it that night. Because at Tom Jamoy Haifu Toy, Sophie was not sitting in front of a birthday cake. She was standing in the marble lobby of the Grand Wellington Hotel, holding a small cake box against her chest, while less than 20 steps away, her father was being handcuffed by 2 police officers. Ethan did not fight. He did not shout. He only kept turning his head, searching the crowd until he saw her. For a second, the noise of the lobby disappeared. The reporters, the guests, the flashing cameras, the whispers, all of it faded. There was only Sophie. The cake slipped from her hands. The box hit the white marble floor, the lid flew open, and the little chocolate cake landed upside down. A candle shaped like the number 1 rolled toward the shoe of a woman in an evening gown, while the candle shaped like 0 stayed beside the ruined cake. Around Sophie, people lifted their phones to record. Some whispered. Some stared at Ethan as if the case had already been solved. A local reporter who had come to cover the charity auction turned his camera toward the security guard being led across the lobby in handcuffs. Ethan had only a few seconds before the police took him outside. He looked straight at his daughter and said the only sentence he could force out of his mouth. "I didn't do it." Then the glass doors closed behind him, and Sophie remained frozen in the middle of the lobby, staring first at the ruined birthday cake, then at the doors where her father had disappeared. To understand how an ordinary father became the main suspect in the biggest theft in the history of the Grand Wellington Hotel, the story has to go back less than an hour. Before Sophie walked into that lobby, before the handcuffs, before the cameras, and before the whole city decided that Ethan Cole was guilty. It began with a necklace worth $3,200,000. Ethan Cole was 38 years old, the night security supervisor at the Grand Wellington, one of the oldest and most luxurious hotels in Chicago. He had worked there for nearly 6 years. He was not the kind of man people noticed. He didn't wear expensive suits. He did not speak with the wealthy guests unless he had to. To most people, he was just the quiet man in the black security uniform who stood near the elevators, checked the back entrances, and appeared when a drunk guest caused trouble. But to the people who worked with him, Ethan was one of the most reliable men in the building. He arrived early. He almost never called in sick. He had never been written up. There was a reason Ethan lived that way. 5 years earlier, his wife Rachel had died after a long illness. Sophie had been only 5 years old. When Rachel died, Ethan lost not only the woman he loved, but also the life he had imagined for his family. What she left behind was a little girl who needed him, and medical bills so large that even years later he was still paying them down 1 shift at a time. During the day, he was a father. At night, he was a security guard. Some weeks, Sophie only saw him in the mornings, when he had just come home from work and was trying not to fall asleep while making breakfast. But Ethan had one rule. No matter how hard life became, he would never let Sophie feel like a burden. When she asked why he did not buy new shoes, he said the old ones were more comfortable. When she asked why he did not replace his car, he said the old Ford had personality. When she asked why he sat alone in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with bills spread across the table, he said adults sometimes like doing math late at night. Sophie knew her father was lying, but they were the kind of small lies a child accepts because she understands the love behind them. And later, those same financial struggles would become the reason everyone believed Ethan had a motive to steal. That night, the Grand Wellington was hosting one of its biggest events of the year, a charity auction to raise money for children's cancer research. More than 300 guests filled the hotel. Business owners, doctors, investors, socialites, and old money families whose names appeared in magazines more often than on mailboxes. The centerpiece of the auction was the Northern Star, a diamond necklace made of 48 white diamonds surrounding a rare blue diamond at the center. Its owner was Victoria Hale, a 72-year-old widow, the wife of a late real estate magnate, and one of the largest donors to the city's children's hospital. Victoria had agreed to auction the necklace on one condition: every dollar would go to the research fund. Because of the necklace's value, security had been increased throughout the hotel. The Northern Star was displayed inside a reinforced glass case in a private exhibition room on the 21st floor. Only a handful of people had access to that room. Ethan was one of them, and that made him the perfect target. At Bezo Mui Tam Phu Toi, Ethan was checking a service entrance near the kitchen when his radio buzzed. A door sensor on the 21st floor was sending irregular signals. The call came from Marcus Reed, the surveillance systems engineer. Marcus told Ethan that the sensor kept showing the door opening and closing, even though no one should have been inside, and he asked Ethan to check it in person. Ethan looked at his watch. He had planned to leave at Bezo Mui Phu. Sophie was waiting. The telescope was still in the trunk, but a malfunctioning sensor in the room, holding a necklace worth more than $3 million, was not something he could ignore. Ethan took the elevator to the 21st floor. The hallway camera recorded him stepping out at Bezo Mui Chin Phu. He walked to the exhibition room, swiped his employee card, opened the door, and went inside. He checked the sensor. He checked the glass case. The Northern Star was still there. Nothing looked wrong. He stayed inside for 1 minute and 43 seconds. Then he called Marcus and said the sensor seemed normal. Marcus replied that the system may have corrected itself after a restart. Ethan left the room. He did not know that the moment he walked through that door, his life had already begun moving into a trap that had been carefully built around him. 11 minutes later, a scream echoed from the 21st floor. The Northern Star was gone. At first, no one suspected Ethan. The hotel immediately locked down the floor. Elevators were stopped, stairwells were checked, police were called. Victoria Hale was taken to a private room. The auction came to a halt. In less than 20 minutes, the elegant charity event became chaos. Ethan did not leave. Even though his daughter's birthday was waiting, he stayed because it was his job. He even helped officers review access logs. That was when everything began to turn against him. The keycard records showed that the last person to open the exhibition room was Ethan Cole. The hallway camera showed him entering. It also showed him leaving. No other person was recorded entering the room before the necklace disappeared. An investigator asked Ethan whether he had touched the glass case. Ethan said yes. He had checked the sensor near the edge of the case. That meant his fingerprints near the display were no longer unusual. But every answer he gave seemed to make things worse. The police asked to search the employee lockers. Ethan agreed. They found nothing in his locker. They searched his car. The necklace was not there. For a few minutes, Ethan thought the misunderstanding would clear itself up. Then an officer returned holding Ethan's jacket. From the inside pocket, he pulled out a dark blue velvet pouch with the logo of Laurent Vabel, the jewelry company that had created the Northern Star. Ethan stared at it for a long time. He had never seen it before. But by then, his denial meant almost nothing. The camera placed him at the scene. The keycard records placed him at the scene. The pouch connected to the necklace had been found in his jacket. And then the police found the last thing they needed: motive. Ethan had more than $80,000 in medical debt. He had once fallen behind on rent. His car payments were overdue. He was a single father under financial pressure, working security around a necklace worth millions. To the police, the story was simple. But while Ethan was being questioned, another story was unfolding across the city. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, thinking her father had forgotten her birthday. At Bezo Mui Phu, she waited. At Bezo Mui Lam Phu, she looked out the window. At Bezo Mui Phu, Ethan did not answer his phone. The mother of Sophie's best friend, who was watching her that evening, suggested they wait a little longer. But Sophie knew her father. Ethan might come home exhausted. He might forget to eat. He might fall asleep on the couch with his shoes still on. But he had never broken a birthday promise. Sophie decided to surprise him instead. Her friend's mother agreed to drive her to the hotel. On the way, they stopped and bought a small chocolate cake. Sophie said her father was probably busy and would be happy to see her. She did not know that at that same moment, Ethan was being told to put his hands behind his back. When Sophie walked into the Grand Wellington, she saw her father being led through the lobby in handcuffs. That moment did more than ruin a birthday. It changed the lives of both father and daughter for weeks to come. The night Ethan was taken to the police station, Sophie slept at her friend's house, if it could be called sleeping. She lay awake until morning. Online, the video of her father's arrest spread quickly. It was only 17 seconds long, but by sunrise, hundreds of thousands of people had seen it. In the video, Ethan lowered his head as officers led him through the crowd. No one recorded the way he looked at Sophie. No one recorded the cake falling. No one recorded the only sentence he said to his daughter. The world saw a man in handcuffs, and for the internet, that was enough. By the next morning, a local news page published a headline about a debt-ridden security guard suspected of stealing a $3 million necklace. By noon, television crews were outside the Grand Wellington. Ethan Cole became a story. But to Sophie, he was not a story. He was her father. 2 days later, Ethan was released on bail while the investigation continued. When he returned to the apartment, Sophie was sitting on the sofa. They looked at each other for a long moment. Ethan wanted to say so many things. He wanted to explain the camera footage, the velvet pouch, the police questions, the way everything had been twisted against him. But in the end, he only apologized for missing her birthday. Sophie did not blame him. She asked only one question. Did he take it? Ethan said no. Sophie nodded. That was the end of the conversation, but the real punishment had only begun. 3 days later, the Grand Wellington suspended Ethan indefinitely. A week later, the landlord reminded him about rent. Some neighbors stopped looking him in the eye. At school, Sophie heard 2 older students call her father the diamond thief. She pushed one of them. The school called Ethan in. On the drive home, Ethan did not yell at her. He only told her that fighting would not change the truth. Sophie sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Ethan thought she was just angry. He did not know she had already started doing something else. Sophie began watching every public video from the night of the theft. She watched news clips. She watched footage posted by guests. She watched the leaked hallway camera video again and again. At first, she only wanted to understand what had happened to her father. But the more she watched, the more something bothered her. In one interview video, Victoria Hale was speaking to a reporter around 6 o'clock that evening. She wore a black dress, her silver hair pinned low, and on her left wrist was an old gold watch. In another video, a woman who looked like Victoria appeared on the 21st floor hallway around the time of the theft. Sophie played the 2 clips side by side, once, twice, 10 times. Then she paused. The woman in the hallway was wearing the watch on her right wrist. It was a tiny detail, so small that Ethan did not understand at first why Sophie called him over. A person could move a watch from one wrist to the other. That proved nothing. But then Ethan remembered something from a hotel event the year before. Victoria Hale had once asked a staff member to help her open a heavy door because her right wrist had been badly injured in a riding accident years earlier. Ethan called his lawyer immediately. The first real clue had appeared. But no one knew yet that behind the watch on the wrong wrist, there was something even more important, 27 seconds missing from the security footage. Ethan's lawyer requested access to all video evidence related to the case. It took several days. During that time, the pressure on Ethan grew heavier. He had no job. His savings were nearly gone. One night, Sophie woke up and heard him talking on the phone in the kitchen. Ethan was trying to get work with another security company. The person on the other end refused. After the call, Ethan sat alone for a long time. Sophie stood behind her bedroom door and did not come out. The next morning, Ethan found an envelope on the table. Inside was $87, all the money Sophie had saved from birthdays and Christmas. On the envelope, she had written only one line, "For rent." Ethan held that envelope for a long time. That night, for the first time since Rachel died, he cried. Not because he was afraid of prison, not because he had lost his job. He cried because he realized this situation was stealing his daughter's childhood. From that moment on, Ethan decided he would not just sit and wait for someone else to prove his innocence. When the lawyer finally received the copy of the footage, Ethan watched every minute. He had worked with the Grand Wellington surveillance system for nearly 6 years. He knew the camera positions, he knew the blind spots, he knew how the files were stored. And on the fourth viewing, he noticed something wrong. The timestamp in the corner of the hallway footage read Bezo hai moi mut foot moi banje. The next frame jumped to Bezo hai moi mut foot bon moi mut jay. There was no blackout, no error message, no frozen image, no broken file. 27 seconds had simply disappeared. Ethan asked to play it again. The result was the same. 27 seconds, shorter than a television commercial, but long enough for someone to open a door, enter a room, and take a necklace. Ethan understood what it meant. The camera did not prove that no one entered after him. It only proved that someone wanted everyone to believe that. The discovery forced the police to look again at the system. Only 4 people had administrator-level access to edit surveillance files. Ethan was one. The head of security was one. The hotel manager was one. And the last was Marcus Reed, the surveillance systems engineer. The same man who had called Ethan to the 21st floor. When Marcus's name appeared, Ethan felt a coldness move through him. He began remembering every detail, the call about the faulty sensor, the way Marcus had made it sound urgent, the fact that Ethan had been sent to that exact room at that exact time. If Marcus was involved, Ethan's appearance on camera was not bad luck. He had been placed there. But suspicion was not proof. Police checked Marcus's bank accounts. There were no large deposits, no obvious suspicious transfers. Marcus still went to work. He still lived in the same apartment. He still drove the same old car. For a while, it seemed as if Ethan had reached another dead end. Then an investigator found that Marcus had once owed nearly $100,000 in gambling debt. That debt had vanished 3 weeks before the theft, not through a normal bank transaction, but through a small consulting company created only months earlier. The company's legal representative was a woman named Elena Voss. When Elena's photograph was placed in front of Ethan, everything changed. Elena had once been Victoria Hale's personal assistant. She had been fired 8 months earlier for violating a confidentiality agreement, but what mattered most was her appearance. She was close to Victoria's height. Her face had a similar structure, and Elena was left-handed. Police began rebuilding the entire plan. Marcus created a fake sensor error. Ethan was called upstairs to check it. The camera recorded Ethan entering the room with the Northern Star. After Ethan left, Elena disguised herself as Victoria Hale and appeared in the hallway. During the 27 seconds Marcus later deleted, Elena used a copied access card to enter the room. Marcus altered the footage. Then he planted the velvet pouch in Ethan's jacket. Everything had been designed to give the police a complete story. A man in debt, an employee with access, a jewelry pouch in his pocket, and a hallway video showing no one else entering the room. Ethan was not unlucky. He had been chosen. But even with suspicion growing, the police still had not found the Northern Star. And without the necklace, Marcus and Elena could deny almost everything. The investigation entered its most dangerous stage because Elena realized the police were getting close. 2 days later, Elena disappeared. Her apartment was empty. Her phone had been left behind. A rental car was found near the airport. Police believed she might be trying to leave the country. But Ethan thought differently. The Northern Star was too famous to sell intact. If Elena wanted money, she would have to break the necklace apart. The 48 white diamonds could be sold separately. The blue diamond at the center would be harder to move, but with altered paperwork and the right private buyers, even that could vanish. Police increased pressure on Marcus. For 6 hours, he said nothing. In the 7th hour, an investigator placed a photograph of Marcus's 13-year-old son on the table. The investigator did not threaten him. He simply said Marcus had to decide whether his son would remember him as a man who made a terrible mistake, or as a man who let an innocent father go to prison to protect that mistake. Marcus broke. He confessed. The Northern Star had never left Chicago. Elena had hidden it in a storage unit rented under a false identity. Police rushed to the unit, but it was empty. Elena had arrived before them. For the next several hours, officers searched traffic cameras, train stations, and private surveillance feeds. Finally, a street camera caught Elena near a train terminal. She was arrested before boarding a train out of the city. The Northern Star was found inside the lining of her suitcase. 12 days after Ethan had been handcuffed in front of his daughter, the necklace was back in police custody. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, Ethan could breathe without feeling a stone pressing against his chest. All charges against Ethan were dropped, but some things could not be repaired by a piece of paper saying he was innocent. The video of his arrest had been viewed more than 2 million times. The video announcing his innocence reached only a fraction of that number. Some people apologized, some deleted their comments, most simply moved on to the next story. The Grand Wellington offered Ethan his job back. They offered him a raise and a promotion. Ethan refused. He did not hate the hotel, but every time he imagined putting on that uniform again and walking across the same lobby where Sophie had dropped her birthday cake, he knew he was not ready to return. 1 week later, someone knocked on the apartment door. Victoria Hale stood outside. No bodyguards, no assistant. She carried a large box. Ethan invited her in. Victoria looked around the small apartment. She saw Sophie's pictures on the wall, a photo of Rachel holding Sophie as a baby, and Ethan's worn work boots near the door. Then she noticed the envelope Sophie had written on, the one that said, "For rent," still kept on a shelf. Victoria did not speak first about the necklace. She spoke about Sophie. She knew the little girl had been the first person to notice the watch, a detail the police, lawyers, and security experts had all missed. Victoria placed the box on the table. Inside was a telescope, new, expensive, better than anything Ethan could ever have bought. Sophie looked at it, but she did not touch it. She turned to her father. Ethan understood that look. Sophie did not want to accept something just because a rich woman felt sorry for them. Victoria seemed to understand too. She explained that it was not charity. It was gratitude from a woman who had nearly lost something precious because everyone had looked too quickly and judged too easily. Sophie accepted the gift, but she had one request. She wanted Victoria to look through the telescope with her. That night, a 72-year-old wealthy widow, an unemployed father, and a 10-year-old girl stood together on the rooftop of an old Chicago apartment building and looked at the stars. There were no reporters, no cameras, no diamonds. Only 3 people pulled into the same story by 27 missing seconds. But Ethan's story was not over yet. 3 months later, he received a job offer, not from Victoria and not from the Grand Wellington. A company that specialized in testing security systems had heard how Ethan noticed the edited footage. They wanted him to join their team as a surveillance vulnerability consultant. The salary was better than his old job. The hours were better. And for the first time in years, Ethan could eat dinner with Sophie almost every night. Life slowly returned to normal, but one winter evening, while they were standing on the rooftop, Sophie asked him a question he did not expect. She asked whether he had been afraid on the day he was arrested. Ethan was silent for a long time. He had been afraid. He had been afraid of prison, afraid of losing Sophie, afraid that he would not have enough money for a good lawyer. But none of those had been his greatest fear. The thing that frightened him most was the moment he saw Sophie in the hotel lobby. For those few seconds, he did not know how his daughter would look at him, as her father or as a thief. Sophie had chosen to believe him. But looking back, Ethan realized belief was not the only thing that saved him. Sophie had done something even more important. She had asked questions. While millions of people saw a man in handcuffs and decided he was guilty, Sophie looked closer. While the adults focused on a $3 million necklace, she focused on a watch. While experts trusted the camera, Ethan noticed the 27 seconds missing from it. The truth had not appeared in one dramatic moment. It had been built from small things other people ignored. A watch worn on the wrong wrist, a phone call made at the perfect time, a gambling debt that disappeared, a security video shortened by 27 seconds, and a 10-year-old girl who refused to accept the first story everyone else believed. Ethan watched Sophie adjust the telescope. She found the North Star, then stepped back so he could look. Ethan bent down and looked through the lens. In the wide darkness of the sky, one small point of light held steady. He suddenly remembered the old telescope still in the trunk of his car, the birthday gift he had never been able to give her. The next day, he took it to a repair shop. 1 week later, he placed the old telescope beside the new one on the rooftop. Sophie asked why they needed 2. Ethan told her that sometimes two people can look at the same sky and notice completely different things. Sophie smiled. Nearly a month after her birthday, Ethan bought another chocolate cake from the same little bakery near their street. This time, there was no hotel, no phones recording, no police, only the small kitchen that belonged to the two of them. Sophie placed the candles shaped like 1 and 0 on top of the cake. Ethan reminded her that her birthday had passed. Sophie said it did not matter. She closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles. Ethan did not ask what she wished for. He only sat across from her and watched the thin smoke rise into the kitchen light. 1 year later, Ethan finally learned what that wish had been. Sophie had written it on the back of a photograph and hidden it in a drawer. The sentence was short. She had not wished for money. She had not wished for a bigger telescope. She had not wished to become famous for helping solve a crime. She had written only this: "I hope Dad never has to prove to me that he is a good man." Ethan read the words for a long time. Then he placed the photograph back exactly where he had found it. Outside the window, Chicago glowed in the dark. The city was still loud. People were still quick to judge each other from short videos. They still believed the first story they heard. They still confused a suspect with a guilty man. But inside that small apartment, Ethan understood that he had recovered the most important thing, not his reputation, not his old job, not the money the hotel had offered him. He had recovered burned toast in the morning, simple dinners with his daughter, cold nights on the rooftop, and the right to be an ordinary father again. For Ethan Cole, that was enough, because sometimes the most valuable thing in a story is not the $3 million necklace that was stolen. It is something no one can put a price on, the faith of a child in her father, and 27 seconds someone tried to erase only to reveal the whole truth.